Welcome to Seattle Atheist Church. Atheist, agnostic, skeptic, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural promoted from the podium. This is our creed. Seattle Atheist Church was founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics. Truth claims are attempted here, and we stand ready to revise our thinking in light of new information. We attempt to be excellent to all conscious beings, and we believe in good, because good works in non-mysterious ways. If that sounds good to you, then you are probably in the right place. Before we get started, I want to just give a couple of announcements. So, last Friday night, we had our movie night. It was super fantastic fun. It happens every first Friday, so please sign up if you'd like to do that. The theater is small and we do fill up. So next week at the Wayward Coffee House, we will be having board games after church. Please join us for that if you're interested. We have a marketing meeting that meets once a month. Please see Stephen if you're interested for that. And then also, our church is run on donations. The only thing we use the donations for currently is to rent the room. So if you enjoy doing this and you want to give a donation, you can do it at Meetup, or you can see Troy back there, or we also have a donation jar. So the way we're going to do this is we have kind of a short talk, then we get into a circle, we have some discussion in our circle, and at 1:30, we'll stop our circle discussion so that we have the room for an extra half hour if people want to stay and continue talking in small groups or whatever. You're welcome to do that. So without further ado, come on up, Jack.
Thanks. Hi, folks. Today I'll once again be giving voice to some fascinating and perhaps provocative thoughts by Greta Christina. Greta Christina has been writing professionally since 1989 on topics including atheism, sexuality and sex positivity, LGBT issues, politics, culture, and whatever crosses your mind. I've given a couple of talks using her material in the past, including a talk on some atheist thoughts on death and grieving, and what's the harm in a little woo. She often writes in the first person, so when you hear me say I and me, that's Greta speaking. Today, I'll be giving voice to her thoughts on why atheists don't have to show respect for religion. Here we go. Can't we all just get along? Among progressive and moderate religious believers, ecumenicalism is a big deal. For many of these believers, being respectful of religious beliefs that are different from theirs is a central guiding principle. In this view, different religions are seen as a beautifully varied tapestry of faith, each strand with its unique truths, and each with its own perspective on God and its own unique way of worshiping Him, her, it, them, whatever. Respecting other people's religious beliefs is a cornerstone of this worldview, to the point where criticizing or even questioning anyone else's religious belief is seen as rude and offensive at best, bigoted and intolerant at worst. And this ecumenical approach to religion drives many atheists up a tree, including me. Why? Don't atheists want a world where everyone's right to their own religious views, including no religious views, is universally acknowledged? Don't we want a world with no religious wars or hatreds? Don't we want a world where a diversity of perspectives on religion is accepted and even embraced? Why would atheists have any objections at all to the principles of religious ecumenicalism? Oh, let's see, where shall I begin? Well, for starters, it's bullshit. Progressive and moderate religious believers absolutely have objections to religious beliefs that are different from theirs. Serious, passionate objections. They object to the religious right. They object to Al-Qaeda. They object to the right-wing fundamentalists preaching homophobic hatred, to Muslim extremists executing women for adultery, to the Catholic Church trying to stop condom distribution in AIDS-riddled Africa, to religious extremists all over the Middle East trying to bomb each other back to the Stone Age, etc., etc., etc. Even when they share the same nominal faith as these believers, they are clearly appalled at the connection. They fervently reject being seen as having anything in common with them, and often go to great lengths to distance themselves from them. And they should. I'm not saying they shouldn't. In fact, one of my main critiques of progressive believers is that their opposition to hateful religious extremists isn't vehement enough. But it's disingenuous and hypocritical to say that criticism of other religious beliefs is inherently bigoted and offensive, and then make an exception for beliefs that are opposed to your own. You don't get to speak about how hardline extremists are clearly getting Christ's message or wrong, or Muhammad's, or Moses's, or Buddha's, or whoever, and then squawk about religious intolerance where others say that you're the one getting it wrong. That's just not playing fair. And of course, it's ridiculously hypocritical to engage in fervent political and cultural discourse, as so many progressive ecumenical believers do, and then expect religion to get a free pass. It's absurd to accept and welcome vigorous public debate over politics, science, medicine, economics, gender, sexuality, education, the role of government, etc., and then get appalled and insulted when religion is treated as just another hypothesis about the world that can be debated and criticized like any other. However, if ecumenicalism were just hypocritical bullshit, I probably wouldn't care very much. Hypocritical bullshit is all over the human race like a cheap suit. I'm not going to get worked up into a lather every time I see another example of it. So why does this bug me so much? Well, it also bugs me because, in an irony that would be hilarious if it weren't so screwed up, a commitment to ecumenicalism all too often leads to intolerance and hostility towards atheists. I've been in a lot of debates with religious believers over the years, and some of the ugliest, nastiest, most bigoted anti-atheist rhetoric I've heard has come from progressive and moderate believers espousing a supposedly tolerant principle of ecumenicalism. I've been called a fascist, a zealot, a missionary. I've been called hateful, intolerant, closed-minded. I've been compared to Glenn Beck and Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler more times than I can count. All by progressive and moderate believers who were outraged at the very notion of atheists pointing out the flaws in religious ideas and making the argument that these ideas are probably not true. Progressive and moderate believers who normally are passionate advocates for free expression of ideas will get equally passionate about demanding that atheists shut the hell up. Progressive and moderate believers who normally are all over the idea of diversity and multiculturalism will get intensely defensive of homogeny when one of the voices in the rich cultural tapestry is saying, "I don't think God exists, and here's why." In a way, I can see it. Ecumenicalism is a big, comfy love fest. Or, to use a less polite metaphor, well, never mind, there are children in the audience. Everyone stands around telling each other how wonderful they are, how fascinating their viewpoint is, and how much they contribute to humanity's rich and evolving vision of God. Everyone is self-deprecating about their own vision of God, and how it's, of course, human and limited and flawed. And how they're both humbled and uplifted to see such different perspectives on him, her, it, them, whatever. Everyone tells the story of the 6 blind men and the elephant. You've probably heard this fable before. There are different versions, but the basics are these. 6 blind men are standing around an elephant, touching it to figure out what the elephant is. The one touching the trunk decides that an elephant is a big snake. The one touching the leg decides the elephant is a tree. The one touching its tail decides the elephant is a rope, etc. It's supposed to show the limitations of individual perception and the importance of not being narrow-minded, and how people with different beliefs can all be right, or all be wrong. You get the gist. Everyone talks about how God is too vast and complex and unfathomable for any one person to perfectly understand him, and how all these different religions are just perceiving different aspects of his immensity. and no one ever says anything critical or even seriously questioning about anyone, ever. It's one gigantic mutual admiration society. And then atheists come along and ruin everyone's party. Atheists come along and say, well, actually, we don't think any of you are getting it right. Atheists come along and ask hard questions like, you actually have important differences between your religions. How do you decide which one is true? Or, religion has never once, in all of human history, turned out to be the right answer to any question. Why would you think it's the right answer to anything we don't currently understand? Or, even if there's no way your belief can be proven wrong, how do you know that it's right? Or, why did the 6 blind men just give up? Why don't they compare notes, trade places, and carefully examine the elephant and actually try to figure out what it is? You know, the way we do in science. I've never seen a version of the fable in which the blind men start explaining to one another why they think the elephant is what they think it is. I've never seen a version where the blind men say, hey, come over here, follow my voice, and check this out. This is why I think it's a snake, or a tree, or a rope, or whatever. And yet, this is exactly how science works. For hundreds of years now, thousands even, the blind men have been saying to each other, over here, check this out, this is why I think it's a snake. And the other blind men come over and check out the snake. One of them says, I agree, this part has a lot in common with a snake, but it also has these differences. And interestingly, the surface feels very much like the tree trunk I was feeling yesterday. And they each form departments to study the different parts of the elephant, and to compare notes and rigorously critique the other's findings about different elephant parts. And they come up with theories to explain what an elephant is, some of which make better or worse predictions about what they'll find in between the snake-like thing and the tree-like thing. And then they embark on their top-of-the-elephant exploration program and send probes and explorers and the Voyager ladder to the top of the elephant and discover that these amazing ear things they'd never even imagined. And as each year and decade and century passes, we get a clearer picture of what an elephant is. It's not perfect. There are big holes in the picture and almost certainly mistakes as well. But we have theories about elephantness that make astonishingly accurate predictions about how the elephant will act and what we'll find next on our continuing elephant explorations. And we have better and better forms of elephant perception all the time, both better techniques for exploring the elephant and better methods for testing that our theories and data about the elephant are good. Our understanding of what an elephant is better now than it was a century ago, and in another century it'll be better still. Why does this work? Because in the case of science, the elephant is really there. Why doesn't this work with religion? Of course, if God existed, he/she/it/they would be vast and complex and hard to fathom. And what, the physical universe isn't? Billions upon billions of galaxies, all rushing apart from each other at blinding speed. Everything made up of atoms that are mostly empty space. Space that curves. Continents that drift. I could go on and on. It's way too big, way too complex, and way too multifaceted for any one person to accurately comprehend. And yet, the blind men are coming to a fair understanding of what an elephant is. Doesn't the fact that this never, ever works with religion strongly suggest that it's all just made up? That in the case of religion, there is in fact no elephant? Atheists come along and make unnerving points like, the fact that you can't come to any consensus about religion isn't a point in your favor. It's actually one of the strongest points against you. Atheists come along like the rain god on everyone's parade and say things like, what reason do you have to think that any of this is true? No wonder they don't like us. Which leads me to the final objection I have to religious ecumenicalism, and by far the most important one. It shows a callous disregard for the truth. This idea that religion is just a matter of opinion, that the most crucial questions about how the universe works and how it came into being should be set aside because disagreements about it might upset people. That it doesn't really matter who actually has the correct answer, correct understanding of God or the soul or whatever. And that when these When faced with these different ideas, it's best to just shrug it off and agree to disagree and go on thinking whatever makes us feel good. That figuring out what probably is and is not true about humanity and the world is a lower priority than not hurting anyone's feelings. That reality is less important and less interesting than the stories people make up about it. It drives me up a tree. In my debates and discussions with religious believers, there's a question I've asked many times. Do you care whether the things you believe are true? And I'm shocked at how many times I've gotten the answer, no, not really. It leaves me baffled, practically speechless. Hey, I said practically. I mean, even leaving out the pragmatic fails and moral and philosophical bankruptcy of prioritizing pleasantry over reality, isn't it grossly disrespectful to the God you supposedly believe in? If you really loved God, wouldn't you want to understand him as best you can? When faced with different ideas about God, wouldn't you want to ask some questions and look at the supporting evidence for the different views and try to figure out which one is probably true? Doesn't it seem incredibly insulting to God to treat the question as if it really didn't matter? There are profound differences between different religions, and they are not trivial. Different religions cannot all be right, although, as atheists like to point out, they can all be wrong. Jesus cannot both be and not be the Son of God. God cannot be both an intentional sentient being and a diffuse supernatural force animating all life. God cannot be both a personal intervening force in our daily lives and a vague metaphorical abstraction of the concepts of flow and existence. Dead people cannot both go to heaven and be reincarnated, etc., etc., etc. When faced with these different ideas, are you really going to shrug your shoulders and say, my, how fascinating, look at all these different ideas. Isn't it amazing how many ways people have of seeing God? What a magnificent tapestry of faith humanity has created. Do you really not care which of these ideas is, true? Part of me can see where the ecumenicalists are coming from. I think they look at a history filled with religious wars and hatreds and bigotry and violence, and they recoil in horror and revulsion. And they should. I recoil from that stuff too. It's not why I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist because I think the religious hypothesis is implausible and unsupported by any good evidence. But it's a big part of why I'm an atheist activist. But the ecumenicalists seem to think there are only two options for dealing with religious differences. A, intolerant evangelism and theocracy, in which people with different religious views are shunned, outlawed, or brutalized. Or B, uncritical ecumenicalism, in which differences in religious views are ignored whenever possible and handled with kid gloves when some sort of handling is absolutely necessary. Ecumenicalists eagerly embrace the second option, largely in horrified response to the first, and they tend to treat any criticism of any religion as if it were automatically part of that ugly, bigoted, and violent history. They don't see that there's a third option. They don't see that there's an option of respecting the important freedom of religious belief while retaining the right to criticize those beliefs and to treat them just like we treat any other idea that we think is mistaken. They don't see the option of being passionate about the right to religious freedom, of fully supporting the right to believe whatever you like as one of your fundamental human rights, while at the same time seeing the right to criticize ideas we don't agree with as an equally fundamental right. They don't see the option of debating and disagreeing without resorting to hatred and violence. They don't see the option of disagreeing with what people say while defending to the death their right to say it. The option advocated by most atheist activists. I will say this. If the only religious believers in the world were progressive, moderate, ecumenical ones, most atheists wouldn't care very much. We'd still disagree with religion. We'd still think it was implausible at best and ridiculous at worst. But it wouldn't really get up our noses that much. We'd see it about the same way we see, say, urban legends, or those internet forwards your Aunt Tilda keeps sending you. Kind of silly, mildly annoying, but mostly harmless, and not worth getting worked up about. And in fact, while I disagree pretty strongly with ecumenical believers, I'm happy to share a world with them, to work in alliance with them on common issues, and to sit down at the dinner table and enjoy a long evening of food and booze and conversation, as long as we don't talk about religion. But ecumenicalists are not the only believers, not by a long shot. When it comes to religion, live and let live believers are very much in the minority. And progressive and moderate religion lends an unfortunate credibility to the conservative and extreme varieties. It lends credibility to the idea that faith is more valuable than evidence, to the idea that it's completely reasonable to believe things that we have no good reason to think are true, and then to act on those beliefs, to the idea that wishful thinking is a good enough reason to believe something. It lends credibility to all the things that make religion most uniquely harmful. And this ecumenical attitude that reality is an annoying distraction from the far more important business of feeling good, and that insisting on reality is an ugly form of bigoted intolerance, is part and parcel of this unique armor religion has built against valid criticism, questioning, and self-correction. It's not a protection against the evils of religion, it's one of them. Okay, so before we break for discussion, I wanted to clear up a common point of confusion. While writing this talk, one of my searches hit on an article by freelance writer David Ramirez titled, "On Why Atheists Have to Show Respect for Religion," in which Ramirez summarizes Greta's article as follows. Greta Christina argued for her right as an atheist to express her intolerance to non-atheists. Did you notice the shift? It's subtle, but the implications are huge. In Ramirez's summary, the target of the intolerance shifted from ideas, non-atheism, to people, non-atheists. Of course, Greta wasn't arguing at all that we ought to express intolerance towards religious people. This is a perfect example of the straw man fallacy, where an argument gives the impression of refuting an opponent's argument while actually refuting a different, weaker argument, one which was not presented by that opponent. Ramirez has put up a straw woman to spar with, which is much easier to defeat than the actual woman he's arguing against. This might be an honest mistake on Ramirez's part, so I'll lend him the benefit of the doubt for now. But it's a common tactic in the anti-atheist playbook, misinterpreting criticisms of religious ideas as criticisms of religious people, so it's worth keeping an eye out for. But it's more than just a common rhetorical tactic. It's a common mistake that human brains make when their beliefs are criticized. You see, we often identify ourselves, our ego, with the beliefs that we hold. When something that we believe is criticized, we feel that we are being criticized. Of course, we are not the same thing as our thoughts. We are not the same thing as our beliefs. But it can certainly feel that way at the moment. But this goes for all kinds of beliefs, not just religious beliefs, but also beliefs about politics, science, medicine, economics, gender, sexuality, education, the role of government, etc. As Greta said, we accept and even welcome vigorous public debate over these other kinds of beliefs, even though individual humans might and do take personal offense when their beliefs on those topics are challenged. Religious beliefs don't deserve any kind of special status in this regard, and we shouldn't give them any kind of special protection or treat them with any special respect. Greta elaborates on this in her recent book, The Way of the Heathen, Practicing Atheism in Everyday Life, in a section called Playing Well with Others, Believers and Other Atheists. She writes, "My basic principle is to treat people with respect and dignity, while retaining the right to criticize and even insult ideas." In the chapter called Is It Okay to Mock Religion, she writes that, "When I'm criticizing or mocking religion, there's a line I try to draw. I focus on beliefs and not actions. Beliefs and actions, not on people. I say things like, Catholicism is ridiculous, not Catholics are fools. Partly I do this because saying Catholics are fools veers dangerously close to bigotry. Because Catholics are so diverse and vary greatly in how much they adhere to the tenets of Catholicism, saying they're all fools is deriding people on the basis of the group they're in. When we mock religious ideas and actions, we're participating in a noble tradition of satire as social criticism. When we mock people, we're a part of an uglier tradition. But I also draw the distinction because Catholics are fools is just not true. Catholics are no more or less intelligent than anyone else. They have some mistaken ideas about the world, but so does everyone. You don't have to be a fool to make mistakes, or even to hold on to mistakes in the face of overwhelming contradictory evidence. We all do that. She writes elsewhere that the unfortunate reality, though, is that all atheist ideas are confrontational. Our very existence is confrontational. Our mildest billboard and bus ad campaigns, the ones saying, "You can be good without God," or "Don't believe in God, you're not alone," or simply "atheists," are met with outrage, hatred, and even censorship. When we come out as godless, we're telling believers they're wrong. We are being confrontational simply by existing. Of course, when people say they believe in God, they're telling us we're wrong. It's confrontation either way. And confrontation doesn't have to be the end of a connection. It can be the beginning of one. Confrontation is often a spark to changing our minds. Ask any good-sized group of atheists how many used to be believers, and then ask them how many changed their minds, at least in part, because of arguments they read, heard, saw on YouTube, or had with family or friends. I can almost guarantee the number will be high. So I'd like to close today with a quote that Richard Dawkins often shares from British journalist Johann Hari, who said, "I have so much respect for you that I cannot respect your ridiculous ideas." Thank you.